Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 180, cover dated April 1984. The cover here by John Romita Jr., inked by Dan Green, featuring Storm and Kitty Pryde, looking very 1980s in terms of her fashion there. And what is going on here? The two have been having some tension in their relationship ever since Storm changed her look into this more kind of darker biker leathers that she wears now, and of course her mohawk, and they're going to have a heart-to-heart in this issue. And this particular issue is very interesting. There's not too much in the way of action in it. It's very much a series of character studies and something of a quiet issue, a day in the life of various X-Men and their emotional situations and conflicts. So the title of the story is Whose Life Is It Anyway? And the creative team is Chris Claremont, writer, John Romita Jr., breakdown artist, Dan Green, and Bob Wiacek finishing via inks. Glynis Wine, colorist, and Tom Orzechowski, letterer. So his name is Charles Xavier, and for the first time in decades he can walk, and that's something that happened in New Mutants number 14. So not only is he walking, but he's also playing basketball here. So we've got a nice little DeLuca effect sequence here with Professor X dribbling the ball and shooting, and then just bouncing off the rim and going for it again. And then suddenly he is attacked by that psychic scanning wave that has happened. This is the fourth time it's happened, and he thinks here to himself, but it's a scanning wave, but what is it looking for? Me? Why? This force feels alien, not merely to Earth, but to our very universe. And we're going to see something at the end of the issue where I'll talk a little bit more about that. So he is interrupted by Storm, who's come to check out whether he's all right, because he shouted out in pain. And then they have a bit of a chat about the fact, in Storm's opinion, Professor X is pushing himself too hard, only having recently regained the use of his legs. And she says to him, and you could do yourself a serious injury. But this is an interesting point here. Professor X reveals that in college he loved sports, but he had to give it up. Why? Because he could read the opposing team's thoughts. I knew their plans the moment they did, and was able to counter them with ease. It was a cruelly unfair advantage. It took all the joy out of the game, he says. Under the circumstances, it would have been dishonorable to keep playing, so I quit. I hated my side talent then. I'd have given anything to be rid of it. So that's an interesting perspective on Professor X, and reveals, that he always was an honorable guy who wanted to do the best he could in the world and didn't want to cheat or take any unfair advantage over his sports opponents by virtue of his side talent. Then he asks Aurora, is she okay? And she makes the point, not according to Kitty. To her, I've become a monster. And Professor X makes the point, well, you've certainly changed. And she asks for better or worse. And he thinks to himself, how extraordinary. I've never thought of Storm as a woman. She always seemed beyond such things. That was her goddess persona. Yet looking at her now, he thinks, I suddenly find myself all too aware of how female and attractive she is. So that really is an indication that Storm's adventures in Japan, with Yukio in particular, made her confront not just darker aspects of her personality, but also her sexuality as well. And she's expressing that now, different from the aloof goddess that she was. So she says, the difference is not cosmetic, Professor. My appearance is an expression of something deep within me, and at times this transformation frightens me as much as Kitty. I find myself casting aside the precepts and beliefs that gave my life meaning, and hardly missing them once they're gone. I nearly killed Callisto of the Morlocks when we first fought, and would have done so during our second battle had I been given the chance. So that was in the previous issue, number 179. I who once held all life sacred, sometimes I think, I fear, I hope I must be insane. But Professor X uses his side talent to probe her brain and sees no sign of mental illness. So it's a character change. There's nothing wrong with Storm, but she is growing up and getting in touch with darker aspects of her nature. The professor says he'll help as best he can, and Storm demurs and says, "No, Professor, for the present I prefer to find my own path. But is it to become the wind rider I once was, or accept that what I am is what I truly wish to be?" She thinks to herself. And then we have a scene switch elsewhere. And of course it's 1984, so we've got 1984 style arcade games. And we've got Kitty and Douglas Ramsey out on I suppose, a kind of date, playing these arcade games, and they're doing so well. Look at, there's Doug's score, and here's Kitty about to max out the machine, which she does. And the arcade owner comes out and says that's it, he wants them to beat it, because he says here, "I'm tired of you two brats hogging my consoles, playing for hours on one lousy quarter. You're ruining my business. I want you out, and I don't want you coming back ever." So Kitty's unhappy, creep she calls him. That just about makes it unanimous. We've been banned from every decent arcade in Westchester County. So Doug has a bit of a laugh about it, and they head off to McDonald's, it seems, for some burgers and fries. And Doug asks her why the grumps, and she says, "It's a Roro. When we first met, I thought she was the most beautiful person, inside and out, I'd ever seen. Then last spring in Japan, she cut her hair, changed her clothes, she suddenly got harder, tougher. The gentleness, the serenity was all gone." So she makes the point, that her own, she says here, "I always figured that when you love someone, it was forever. That didn't hold for my folks," so her parents have separated, "but I thought it would for me and a Roro." And Doug asks her, "Now you're not so sure?" And she says, "How can you love someone who scares you?" So Doug comforts her here, and he makes the point that, he's got some good news for her, and it's this: "I've got an appointment next week at the Massachusetts Academy. I was hoping you'd come along to show me the school. You were a student there?" "Only for a week," she says. "I hated it." "How come?" "Chemistry, I guess." She says, "I wasn't cut out to be a preppy, but the real reason is this," which she thinks to herself, "more importantly, I'm an X-Man, and that school's run by the Hellfire Club. Our nastiest enemies, a bunch of evil mutants out to conquer the world. I can't let Doug go up there alone. Who knows what might happen to him?" So she's got to do something, and what is that? Well, we have a scene switch to the X-Mansion, and out on the grounds, we've got this axe hewing into a tree trunk. Who could it be? Who's always out and about in the grounds of the mansion, felling trees, except for Peter Rasputin. There he is, and the tree's about to fall. And he's recovering from his injuries that he sustained over the last couple of issues in his battle against the evil mutants, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, rather. And who's there watching him incognito, except for Wolverine? He makes himself known. He's having a beer and a smoke. It's 1984, remember? And he says to Peter, "You really chopped the blazes out of that tree, and one-handed too. Pretty impressive, big fella." But Peter doesn't want company. And Wolverine says, "You got no business tearing yourself up over Kitty. It's none of your concern," says Peter. He says, "You're both friends. That makes it my concern." And this is an interesting point from Peter. He says, "Do you know that in Russia, she and I could be married now and raising a family? If that's what you want, it won't hurt to wait," says Wolverine. "I thought it was, and that I could. It never entered my head that Katya felt differently. She gave herself to the Morlocks," says Wolverine, "to save your life, bub. I figure that gives a pretty good idea of where she stands." And he says he wishes he was certain. And then he is jealous, or envious rather. Well, jealous of Kitty and envious of Douglas Ramsey. He says here, "Douglas Ramsey is everything I'm not and can never be. Watching Kitty with him, listening to them, brings home some brutal truths. I am an ignorant peasant from a society and culture as alien to her as any we've encountered in space. Kitty was a dream, my friend. Perhaps it's time at last to wake and face the reality." But Wolverine isn't having any of Peter's pity party. He says, "If that's what you truly believe, Peter, about yourself as well as her, you've lost already, more than you know." Nice art by John Romita Jr. on these pages, and even more so on these couple of pages here, where the scene switches to the Bronx Botanical Gardens. And a lot of work here by John Romita Jr. So remember, he's doing breakdowns only. He's not finishing the pencils. The finished art here is by Dan Green and later on by Bob Wiacek in the issue. So a lot of work on these pages, and I think maybe Romita Jr. Miffed at the fact that he's not allowed to do completed pencils and showing off all this hard work here. And I love the narrative captions by Chris Claremont, so I'm going to read those ones out. The afternoon is chill and overcast with more than a hint of snow in the air. The majestic trees that crowd the park now are stripped to bare branches, the ground beneath them frozen rock hard. After a splendid Indian summer, winter has come to New York with a vengeance. But inside the vast greenhouses, time seemingly stands still, and the inexorable march of the seasons is denied. Flowers are in bloom, covering the floor with a carpet of truly living colour, and filling the air with their glorious heady scent. Aurora comes here often, to visit old dear friends, the blossoms that once graced her attic loft at Xavier's school. So that's what she did with her flowers when she returned from Japan. She emptied her attic and she didn't destroy the flowers, but donated them here to the Bronx Botanical Gardens, and she's come to visit them. And she thinks back and reminisces about her time in Africa. She thinks here, in many ways, this place reminds me of my old home in Africa. How beautiful and peaceful that was, to live in perfect harmony with nature. I feared not long ago that I'd lost that special rapport with the earth, but on my first trip to these gardens, indeed my first steps into this greenhouse, I realised I'm as aware of life as I ever was. So her change is not to wholly turn her back on who she was in the past. If her garb has changed and is much racier now, with these tights, these fishnet stockings that she's wearing, and all the rest of it, she isn't the complete opposite of who she was. She maintains some of that previous character, and this is of course fitting that she's looking at herself, her reflection in the glass of the greenhouse, and then she's watering the flowers there and the plants. And of course there has to be some action in this comic, and there's a mugging in the middle of the greenhouse. These guys from this street gang have mugged this woman's husband, and they're threatening sexual violence as well. Not good enough. This guy says to the woman, you want to save your man, you got to make us real happy. So Aurora interrupts, and here she says, you'll answer to me. And so they pull their knives out, and this guy, the leader, says, no, babe, tells the Rusher Street rebels what to do. And Aurora smiles. Oh, really? So now we get a little fight sequence here from John Romita Jr. She doesn't use her powers against these guys, and she uses training with Wolverine to take them on. Here she is thinking to herself, I must pivot just so, as Wolverine taught me, and let my opponent's own momentum do the rest, as she flings this guy into some poison oaks. Great storytelling on this page, great action sequence by John Romita Jr. And let's continue. So then she summons some St. Elmo's fire around her for the coup de grace, and she scares off the muggers. She tells them, I suggest, gentlemen, you renounce your evil ways. If you do not, I shall learn of it and be very angry. So then she hunkers down to help the old couple, but she realizes even though she saved their lives, they're more terrified of her than of the thugs who attack them. And she thinks to herself, I should be used to that. It ought not to hurt. But then she's interrupted by a side flash from Professor X, who tells her to return to the X-Mansion. So now we've got a nice establishing shot of the X-Mansion. A lot of detail here in the library room, Professor X's study. And so there's kind of like a team meeting here where Kitty's talking about Douglas's invitation to the Massachusetts Academy and how she's worried about the Hellfire Club. And she says here, I believe the risk is minimal. The club's in disarray, she says. Its effective membership reduced to Sebastian Shaw and Emma Frost. And so far as we know, she's still in a coma. So the editorial note from Louise Jones there is see X-Men 169 and X-Men Annual 7. And Professor X says, I wonder why the Academy is so interested in young Douglas. Could they know he's a mutant? So this is a shock to Kitty and also to the readers. So Professor X continues and says, his gift is languages, both human and computer. Not as demonstrative a talent as mind reading or phasing, but legitimate nonetheless. Your opinion, Storm? So Storm gives her opinion. I do not like the idea of Kitty walking into the enemy camp by herself, but our plan covers every contingency. We'll see if every contingency is covered towards the end of the issue. With reservations, Storm approves. Professor X concurs, and so there's a plan in place that Kitty will accompany Doug to the Massachusetts Academy to keep an eye on him and protect him. So then she walks down the hall from the library and she's thinking to herself on the whole point that Doug's a mutant and that she wishes she could tell him, but the professor says it's safer in the long run that he does not know. And suddenly she becomes aware of a breeze blowing through the hallway, and she's pulled out the window up into the air, and she says to Aurora, okay, you could have just asked. There was no need to be such a show-off for them to have a private chat. So Aurora puts the point to her. The Storm you prefer would not have done so. Correct, that's right. So for your peace of mind, I must force myself to be something I'm not, asks Aurora. And so here they have this, they hash it out together, and it all boils down to what Storm says here. Life involves growth, and growth continual change. You may not like those changes, but you cannot run from them. You must face them, child. And Kitty is not reconciled just yet. She retorts, some people shouldn't change. They should be constant. It was bad enough my parents couldn't keep the promises they made to each other, but I thought I could count on you. And Storm puts the point to her, by what right? She says, Kitty, I am your friend. I pray I shall always remain so, but that is all I am. But that is all I am, must not be your mother. I used to believe I could play that role to fill in a void in each of our lives, but that was a mistake. So, Storm says that we each have our lives to live, our own roads to walk to our individual destinies. Friends and lovers may walk by our side, but ultimately the journey is made alone. I'm learning things about myself I do not like, but I must keep learning, striving to find my true self, my place in the scheme of things. I must know who I am. I must live my life as I see fit. If you love me, kitten, you must let me do so. So Kitty makes the point that she's scared. Will it happen to her too? Like this, if she falls in love, will it only be for a while? Or worse, will the person I love stop loving her? And she says as she hugs Aurora, I can't bear seeing you destroy yourself. But Aurora says in return, perhaps I'm infected with a kind of madness, but for the first time in my adult life, I can laugh and cry. I can feel to the fullest extent of my being without having to deny that emotion and cast it out for what I thought was my own good. So she says, bear with me, Kitty, stand by me. I need the strength of a true friend. Even if in days to come that strength may be the ability and willingness to let me go. Can you do that? And Kitty whispers that she'll try. So it's interesting, this exploration of the need for change and how change can be frightening, and how in order to develop one's character, you're going to have to leave behind what friends and family expect of you. And very interesting in a comic book that is about outsiders, people feared and hated by the general population. How can these people be their full and true selves without testing what others expect of them? So clever of Claremont working that into the relationship between Aurora and Kitty and developing it along with Aurora's character and subsequently Kitty's own character too. And then the scene switches to LaGuardia Airport the following week. The Massachusetts Academy has sent a private jet for Kitty and Doug, and so they're heading up in the air. There's a little moment there between Peter and Kitty where she asks for a kiss for luck, and he apparently doesn't give her one, but he tells her to have a nice trip and to take care. And she thinks, what did I do? Why is Peter acting so strangely? He's so uncomfortable when I'm around. Doesn't he care for me anymore? So she's not tuned into the fact that he is jealous and that he's envious of her relationship with Doug, her burgeoning relationship with Doug Ramsey. So they're aboard the private jet, and someone emerges from behind this screen and says, "On behalf of the Massachusetts Academy, Douglas and Catherine, I welcome you aboard." And Kitty recognizes the voice and then the face. It's the White Queen, it's Emma Frost, not in a coma anymore. "How nice to see you again, Catherine," she says. "I've been so looking forward to our reunion. I'm ever so glad you decided to accompany Douglas. I've taken the utmost care to ensure that your stay with me is quite unforgettable," she says. And what happens next is covered in New Mutants 15. But first, Kitty sends out a mental cry for help. Professor Xavier, help. This contingency, was it expected? No. And then where is the professor? Well, he's in Midtown Manhattan, Central Park, because he explains to the X-Men, "I've encountered a series of psychic scanning waves of incredible power and seemingly extraterrestrial origin. I've no idea who's responsible or what they're seeking, but tonight suddenly I've been able to pinpoint its source, the sheep meadow in Central Park." So the X-Men head in, and what do they see except for this giant structure? And Colossus asks, "How could anything so huge appear in the middle of New York without being noticed?" And Wolverine asks, "What next, Charlie?" And Professor X says, "I suppose, Wolverine, we see what's inside, eh?" So they enter the structure, and the narrative captions say, "Before Kitty's cry for help can reach Xavier, he and the X-Men find themselves drawn en masse into the titanic construct. Try as they might with all their might to resist, and once within the gate, they vanish from the earth, from reality as they know it, perhaps never to return." So where do they end up? Well, Kitty's saga continues in New Mutants 15, as I said, while the X-Men's continues in Secret Wars, which had been advertised for months. And it would turn out that those psychic scanning waves were the Beyonder checking out Earth's mightiest heroes. And this is a structure that transports the X-Men to Battleworld. And when I turn the page here, you are going to see Mike Zeck's famous cover or house ad for Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. So we've got Cyclops there, we've got Rogue, we've got Shadowcat, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, of course, Colossus, and Storm back here. All there for Secret Wars and Battleworld, the ultimate 12-issue limited series. So did you check out Secret Wars back in the day? Let me know in the comments, and what was your opinion of it? There's mixed opinions on Secret Wars. But back to this issue, I do hope you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 180. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.